Good morning. I want to thank first the Jaime and the Institute for inviting me to come here and say a few words. Some of you that know me knows that I'm a data man. I decided to do something else today. One of the, or some of the scholars that deal with conflict resolution give you the advice that you should put yourself in the other man's shoes. I'm going to try to give you an idea of what the debate that is going on today on economic policy in Cuba. It's a debate going on for the first time in a long time. It's a real debate. The difficulty with that is that there's not only one pair of shoes. There's several pair of shoes flying around in Cuba at this time. I think in three broad categories. I would do it first, use the terminology that they themselves use in Cuba. One faction is the statists or the Stalinists. They usually actually use the Stalinists, which is the one that is really enforced today in Cuba at the present time. The second one actually is called, they call in the debate, the economicista faction. That the economicista faction, I guess you can classify it as the market socialism. That's one way to look at it. And the third faction, of course, the two first factions don't speak too much about democracy or human rights. There are few exceptions because there's some people who cross over those two lines. The third faction actually is a very interesting faction. It's the one that talks about democracy. But they're basically talking about autogestión or cooperative system, which is basically kind of a Trotskyite type of model. One of the principals proponents of that is Camila Piñero Hacaner. That's the daughter of Barbarroja and Marta Hacaner. The other ones, you can read all this in Chaos on the Red also, as some of the exponents of this talking about this. The first, then if we have time, I'll talk a little bit about the new foreign investment law, which, by the way, I read last night, and it must be a nightmare for any lawyer that tried to invest in Cuba. I don't think it's any lawyer from one of the big corporations read it will recommend their bosses to invest in Cuba at this moment. And the second one, I tried to give you some idea of what has happened at the exchange rate movement. Well, the first one actually is what Raúl Castro is trying to do. And basically, they don't have much to do with the private sector. Actually, what they would like to do is to do the least at this moment with the private sector, except with foreign investments. Foreign investments is a separate part. It's what some people might call la economía de Timbiriche, which is basically a very small private sector, cuentaprotistas, which are taxed to the death, which have a lot of regulatory type of system. And it will not work anyway unless you have some macroeconomic reforms, which they're not likely to do at this moment. Basically, the model is a state capitalism system. You can read it in the speeches of Raúl Castro of what the main line is, which is discipline, anti-corruption, people must work more, is kind of a military structure more than anything else. Now, some people think, and as a matter of fact, some of the people from the economicista faction that support perhaps that type of model, they think that it will evolve into some sort of a market socialism system. I have my doubts. I have my doubts about that. I don't think that the system will be something. I think what the it's very heavy, supported by the Bureau Politico, the hard faction. The military, I don't know. I think that the military, my suspicion is that the real military are behind the government, and the entrepreneurs military, the generals, I guess some of them will support this, some of them will support the other model, because the other model is likely to, they could become private sector entrepreneurs in the second model. It's not much you can say about the model. It's kind of a Gorbachev type of thing, trying, like Mario was saying, trying to save socialism. They say is in the speeches, that's what they say. Now, the second model basically is a model which is market socialism, if you want to call it that way. And is, who are the supporters? Basically are the academics. If you read debates, most of the academics, you read Juan Triana, you read Pavel Vidal, what they would like to have is an economic program or an economic policy, which is very close to, I would say, a Cuban version of the Vietnamese and Chinese model, more or less. They're very vocal at this time. They're writing a lot inside Cuba and outside Cuba. I don't know how much influence they have on the present government. Basically, the model will move into macroeconomic reforms. Macroeconomic reforms in the terms of let the price system work, let the market system work, let the private sector flourish, let the private sector flourish. They don't talk about democracy at all or human rights, except there are 2 or 3 people on this model, which basically they're outside Cuba and they come in once in a while to Cuba, but then they leave Cuba and so forth, which talk about human rights, and they talk about that this model will work only if there is democratic reform in Cuba. This is something that I suppose suggests that it's something to look at in the future. I don't think they have much influence at this moment with the present government. They talk about foreign private investment. Although their language is pretty much the same as the, you would say, somebody in the in a free market economy, they're closer to, they still consider that the state should be very smaller but very strong. They still they don't talk about all, like I said before, about democracy or human rights, except 2 or 3. I think Pedro Monreal is the one who recently wrote, actually, in Espacio Laical, a very strong piece that towards the end, after enumerating all the necessary macroeconomic reforms, they would, he said that the model, of course, it has to do with politics, and this will not work unless you have, you respect human rights and you have a democratic system. I guess he will go back to Jamaica for a while after writing that article. This is a model that probably the international financial institution will support, like the World Bank or the IMF or the Inter-American Development Bank. The third model is a very curious model. Basically, they're very, very critical of the present government. They're very critical of the present government. They call it status, they call it Stalinist, they call it all the names you want to call it, the state capitalism. But the proposal is basically that Cuba should be formed, the whole economy should be around cooperative. Cooperative in the agricultural sector, cooperatives in the consumer sector, cooperatives in the industrial sector. Of course, this is a solution that it would solve probably the day-to-day eating. It would probably put the breakfast and the lunch and the dinner on the table, but that's about it. That it will not work. Now, the three models, in a sense, and you can see it even in the second model, or the second program, they still have not learned the lesson that today's world is basically a very interconnected world, that basically, even though they talk about the different eslabones, de la productividad and things like that, they really do not understand how the modern economics, international economics works. Now, the reason I talked about the three different models is that I think what Cuba will face in the future, it will be a combination. You will have the three things. My feeling is that you're likely to get, once you have a change, you're likely to get some sort of a composite of the three models, some way or another one. Now, let me, with the time that I have left, let me talk first about the foreign exchange reforms. Cuba basically had the dual exchange rate system. Basically what it is a massive subsidy system that used the exchange rate instead of using the tax system. That's the way you should look at it, or the way I'd look at it anyway. Cuba had four options to reform the foreign exchange system. They chose one. Let me spell out the four options. The first option would have been the simplest way, probably the more hard way to do it. Probably would create a tremendous amount of inflation, but it would be the closest to the market system and the closest and the best signal they could give for a market-oriented economy, which would have been unify the exchange rate at 24-1. One exchange rate, 24-1. One big band at 24-1. That, of course, would create tremendous amount of inflation. It would create, if you look at the experience in Latin America, where they have done that in Argentina or I think in Ecuador, stuff like that, you can move to a very high rate of inflation very fast. In the case of Cuba, which is a difference of 2,300%, I think between 24 and 1, the inflation would have been very, very big, and the suffering of the population would have been very large. You can do that system only if you have a lot of foreign financial assistance, which Cuba doesn't have at this moment. Now, the second option that they had, it would have been a very complex, but a very probably more efficient way to do it, which would have been to have basically to announce a foreign exchange move let's say 3 months will be 10 to 1, and 15 to 1, 20 to 1, stuff like that. And in the process, that would have given a very clear signal where the system is going. It would have been also probably a good signal for the market system also to work, but it would imply basically that in order to not to have a big inflation and not to have the reason you have a big inflation is because the government loses a tremendous amount of revenue. Once you have the big bang, and once you have the system, the government loses a tremendous amount of revenue. It will be through some sort of a tax system, a subsidy system, but through the tax system instead of through the exchange rate system. That did not choose that either. Now, the other system that would have chosen, which they did not do, is to do it by sector with any, they say, energy sector so much, the food sector so much, without any tax subsidies or any type of government subsidy to take over the previous subsidy system through the exchange rate system. Now, the system that they chose probably is the more complex, the less efficient. Probably it will not work because it's going to be a lot of resistance to it. It is likely also to create all kind of arbitrage between one exchange rate to the other exchange rate, which is likely to promote corruption. And that system, basically what it is that they have taken 4 exchange rate, one big devaluation, which is the going to 10 to 1, which is basically a 993% devaluation, which is a very strong devaluation, but with any mechanism whatsoever to complement the loss of subsidy on that system. That system is likely to create a lot of resistance over the long run by even the workers, because they will feel they're being cheated. And it's likely, like I said before, to promote corruption by using the arbitrage system. I don't know. I know there will be arbitrage, but which I don't know how, because to a certain extent, since you cannot exchange a cadeca more than small amounts, the corruption system will be through the import system and the export system of the enterprises. That's the way they will do the corruption. Some of the generals are likely to become increase their income through that way. For instance, you import something from, let's say, Spain, and you tell your importer instead of send me an invoice of 20 with the real cost, send me an invoice for 25 and keep the other 5 in Spain someplace. And in the same way with the export system, they will work that way. Now, the foreign investment law. As Mario was talking, I think one of the worst aspects of the foreign investment law is usually when a country promulgates a foreign investment law, usually the people from abroad ask for equal treatment with the nationals. In the case of Cuba, it's really the nationals are really in bad shape. Give you an example. First, the new investment law gives tax holiday for 8 years. There's not such a thing as a tax holiday for any cuenta propista in Cuba or anything like that. 2, the income tax rate is 15%. Okay, 15%, and so on. I'm going over my time. So basically what it is a very discriminatory system toward the national, and very, very favorable system towards to the foreign investors. I guess the idea is to use the Puerto Mariel and try to bring foreign investors to do kind of, assembly lines and more things like that. But it's a black box. We still don't know what it is. So let's stop right here. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos. And I hope we can come back to the foreign investment law in the Q&A section, because there are a lot of things in that. And one of them, and I think there was an article under Juan Tamayo's byline today in the Miami Herald, pointing out that it violates any number of international labor organization laws. So I hope we can get back to that topic in the Q&A section. Frank?
Thank you very much.